It's when you count up the hours. It's when you count up the hours that you get a surprise, because my first 3 years, I added up and it was 24 hours each year. Because if you're doing one tip a week, or it doesn't add up to much.
Yes, but the preparation counts.
Oh, okay. If we count that, then.
because in order to do that one tip a week, you have to be preparing and you have to be focusing on calling, which is what you do as a caller.
I only use preparation H.
Oh,
TMI.
1 minute.
You gave up on A through G, did you?
Yeah.
Well, then Ross and I should have quite a few hours between the two of us in the meantime.
Initially, some of it probably not quality preparation. We were going around in circles, weren't we?
Oh, certainly. Yes.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's now 9 o'clock and I think it's time to get started. Welcome everybody to today's session. For those of you that we're expecting to see Bob Ellings, what happened there?
Can I get hooked up for recording?
Hello.
We hear you.
We can hear you.
Can you hear you, Mel?
You miserable
Yeah, we can hear
got
you,
it.
Mel.
bucket of
Thank
garbage.
you.
Heck is going on here?
What?
You lose your PowerPoint.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I've suddenly got a black computer screen. Okay, well, let's see if we can figure something out here. Give me 1 second.
Well, it is Black History Month.
Oh, jeez.
That's in the US.
Yeah.
Fuck that.
I don't know if this is working at all.
It is.
We can see it.
Mel. Mel,
Yes.
you're sharing your screen.
Mark, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm also here.
You're gonna have to watch the door for me because I haven't got a clue. I can't see anybody. But I've got the presentation up. I don't know what's going on with Zoom, but I seem to have lost my Zoom screen. So if there is something that comes up, or if you have an interjection or a question on what I'm going to be talking about, by all means, please just interrupt it. But apparently you can hear me and the screen's up, so I'll just carry on.
Can you get the chat?
Sorry?
Can you get a chat?
I've got nothing on Zoom. I don't know what happened. My Zoom screen just went completely black.
Okay, so the answer is no.
No. Yeah, that's one way of putting it. No. Once again, I want to thank Mark Hart for looking after all the technical stuff and all the stuff that goes behind the scenes. He has saved and cataloged and indexed pretty much everything from these sessions, from Dan Like and Don Beck's sessions on the Orange County Callers website for a great teaching and reference material. So thank you very much, Mark. It's one of those things in the background that goes very understated. And like I said, because I can't see anybody, if you do have a question, just interject or send Mark a message and he'll interrupt me if you're not comfortable interjecting, and we'll deal with it. For those of you who are expecting Bob Elling today, Bob emailed me last night. He's come down with
I wanted Bob.
Yeah, I know, I did too. He came down with a bad case of COVID and he does send his apologies, but he will be back as soon as he can. And we wish him well and a speedy recovery. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was essentially get back to the fundamentals of teaching techniques. Now, this is based primarily on the writings of a lot of square dance callers, but a lot of teachers in general. Please don't doodle on the screen. But mainly Jerry Reed. And although there's many excellent square dance teachers out there, and there are excellent callers, there are also mediocre teachers at best. Nevertheless, teaching, in my opinion, is one of the most important jobs of any caller. And as a caller, we should be prepared to undertake this task each time we pick up our microphone. Now, teaching itself can be as formal as a regular class or a workshop situation, or as informal as a simple discussion of a particular move or a concept over coffee in a restaurant or anything along that line. Teaching people to dance is not only one of our most important skills, but also one of the most difficult, and learning how to do it properly and effectively is one of the things that very little time is spent on as far as learning and as far as mentoring goes. So teaching people to do something is, Huel, can you please stop drawing on the screen?
I wasn't supposed to. I don't know whether.
Okay. Teaching people to do something is not an easy task. Teaching them to do it properly is an even harder task. Unfortunately, very few callers receive any extensive training in teaching techniques or the skills required to properly teach people how to dance. There's lots of material on how to teach, but teaching them how to dance is a whole different concept. Now, most callers apply teaching techniques through trial and error, and very few have been given this extremely important skill as part of their caller training. Most who have been fortunate enough to acquire this type of training have received it outside of their caller experience, while a few others have benefited from specialized square dance caller teaching schools, such as what Ken and Jack and them are running. Unfortunately, those types of schools that focus specifically on teaching are few and far between. The sad thought here is how many dropouts could have been prevented, how many dropouts in square dancing could have been prevented by improving caller training to include a more comprehensive study of the skills needed to properly teach others.
Above 2.
Yes, many callers simply teach the way they were taught, and in some cases this may provide a good learning experience for students, while in other cases the students are often getting very confused and very frustrated, especially if you have a caller that picks it up really, really quickly and tries to teach others and expects that same kind of reaction from them. What happens is this confusion and frustration begins to severely hinder learning. And the result is we end up with some very poorly trained dancers, or we end up with dancers that just say, I've had enough, and they quit.
Just
sorry. What? Go ahead. Somebody have something to say there? No?
Oh no, I was just
okay.
It was
one of the biggest failings that in many cases is the job of training new dancers. It's left in the hands too often of our newest and our most inexperienced callers. Now, for over 40 years, I've heard the mantra, and it's true, but it's a double-edged sword. And that mantra is, if you want to learn how to call, teach a class. In my opinion, that's the absolutely wrong approach. This means you're teaching for your benefit and not the benefit of the students. And what you normally get is hesitant new callers thrust nervously into a position of authority without the skills of teaching, trying to teach so that they can develop their calling skills. This is way too much thought processes happening at any one time. Okay? Way, way too much. You've got to know what you're doing before you start teaching. Don't try to learn how to call by learning how to teach.
I'm gay.
Okay, so even though many successful callers started this way, most successful callers will agree that this is not the best situation. Becoming an effective teacher requires development of 3 general skills. The first one is knowledge of what is to be taught. Second is an understanding of how people learn what is to be taught. And the third is the ability to convey or express that knowledge and skill from the teacher to the student. Now, all of these skills can and should be studied well before any teacher steps in front of a group of students. This is especially important with square dancing because you're not only teaching a physical activity, but you're teaching timing, you're teaching a new language, you're teaching an application, you're teaching thought reactivity and cognition, and you're teaching application responses. This is not just a skill to regurgitate facts. There's a lot of other things that go into it to be able to do it properly. The reason it's important to have a good and not just a general knowledge of those 3 skills is because the application in actual training situations provides the experience that's necessary to become an effective teacher. And that is where your focus should be rather than on teaching to become a more effective caller. If you're teaching to become a more effective caller, you're teaching for yourself. It's a bonus, but as with all things calling, your focus should always be on the dancers in front of you and not on yourself. Focusing on yourself is something you always have to do, but you do it for only one reason, and that's for the dancers. An increase in teaching effectiveness can lead to greater new dancer success and probably, in my opinion, greater retention, because the dancer experience is going to be much more successful and much more conducive to wanting to stay. So a very constructive way to gain this experience is for student callers to sit and monitor a class, if it's possible, that is taught by an experienced teacher, and then to teach a class under that guidance of an experienced caller. A good example of this is Raymond Bates in Canberra, who's been working with Alan Kerr. Alan runs the club. He's been mentoring Raymond. Raymond's now doing the classes, but he's sat in and monitored these classes for a long time. He's doing a great job. This type of training program helps establish a very firm foundation base on which new callers can build his or her teaching skills. And what we're going to look at in this presentation is some of that basic information about the methods teachers can use when they teach others. It's intended as both a starting point for new callers, a refresher for experienced callers and teachers, and also those that may be mentoring new callers in the role of a teacher and caller. So to do this, we're going to take a step back and we're going to look at the basics of learning. As a teacher, you've got to be familiar not only with the material that's going to be taught, but also with the way that people are going to learn what's going to be taught. And there's been some really great sessions on how people learn, so I'm not going to delve very deeply into that. But be aware that you have to know how people learn, not just how you teach, because you've got to be able to modify to go to them. Most callers are familiar with the material they're teaching because most callers are dancers. And they may refer to the definition of a move before teaching it, which is always a good thing. You should always be up to date because definitions do change. We see that all the time. Knowing your material, however, is not enough, because teaching is such an important part of the job of any caller at any time. Any time that you spend studying how people learn, including effective teaching methods, will be effort very, very well spent. The topics discussed in this session are rather generic and can be applied to most teaching situations. Sorry, what was that?
Oh, it was.
Okay. I think it was just interference. Okay. Depending on the thing to be learned, people are going to learn in a lot of different ways. And the various methods are generalized into these four categories. They're observing, listening, reading, and doing. There's little nuances and subcategories of each, but it's those four basic things. And if you understand that, that's a really, really good foundation start. Some people learn better from one method, while others learn better from another method. Others will simply learn or will only learn when you have a combination of methods. You have to show them, you have to tell them, you have to give them the material, and you have to walk them through doing it. That's sometimes the only way people learn, is using all four methods. Because of the difference in the way people learn, callers have to be able to present all the information that they wish to get out there, the stuff they want to impart, using all four of these methods. The only thing that's consistent around the world in the way people learn is that everybody learns differently. That is the only consistency, is it's all different. And you have to be able to be flexible enough as a caller and a teacher to adapt your teaching methodology to the way your students are going to learn. So most people learn, this is about learning to know something, okay? Now, most people learn to know something in a different way. They learn to do something. And it's a very, very different aspect. And it's something that's not really taken into account a lot. Learning to know something is often accomplished, and this is your schools and your formal education system. It's often accomplished by one or more of the first three methods: observing, listening, and reading. And students very often gain an understanding of the action in a particular way, or the action of a particular movement, by the first three methods. they get an idea of it, they get an understanding, but it doesn't mean they can do it. However, since learning to square dance requires students to actually perform a physical motion combining a knowledge and a reactive aspect of understanding, a considerable amount of doing is required. In order to provide the adequate training, students must not only have an understanding of the basic action of the movement, but they must also actually do the action. And that's what teaching square dancing is all about. The ability to call, and what you and the dancers gain from it is the ability to do affirmation that can only happen after the teaching is done. So generally you see these 4 categories, but it's not broken down into square dancing particularly. And square dancing is providing them with the first 3, but getting them to do the doing part. And they've got to have application repetition. The automatic reaction for smooth dancing is developed by the repetition of the movements during the teaching process. And then it's retained through the calling and dancing process. You cannot teach something and then leave it and then expect them to come back to it weeks later and know how to do it. So to understand that, we have to look at barriers to learning. The first one is learning speed. Okay? We lump teaching into blocks, and then we force these artificial constraints on students to learn. And thus, over the years, more than 70% of potential square dance students have been lost. Today, we try and lump what was at one time 2 years of fun and dancing and socializing for basic and mainstream into 6 months that takes you from basic through plus, or 12 weeks of SSD in a do or die scenario. There's some really, really good ideas, but without a practical follow-on and without really, really good teaching skills, this time constraint, this artificial time constraint that we put onto learning speed will not work. That person doing that has to be a good teacher. And there are some really good examples, but there's also some really bad examples. It's crucial to understand that each person learns at a very different speed. So build in time in your teaching to reinforce the learning. It may take some people 5 or 6 times as long to learn a given skill than it takes others. And this is why it's important for student dancers to learn the exact and total definition of movement, of each movement they learn, including the styling and the timing. Okay. Even though they're not going to learn to actually dance each move from all allowable formations and arrangements, and there's no need to do that at first, they need to be aware that such other applications exist and are, I hate using the term, but are legal or are proper in their minds, thus less susceptible. When you do that, they're going to be less susceptible to freeze or fight against that occasional unusual use. We go back to the movement recycle as an example, and that'll come up later, but usually it's boys on the end, girls in the middle, ladies trade, recycle. That's it. That's all they know. And it's taught, you turn back, wheel and deal, and here we go, and blah, 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 blah. When something changes that parameter, the floor freezes. So this is where we get into things like positive and negative transfer. When people learn something well, they're usually able to apply that knowledge when learning something new. And that process is called transfer. And it occurs whenever, well, it occurs all the time in square dancing. There's always transfer, but it can be positive or negative. Positive transfer is why it is easier for students to learn something like weave the ring after they've learned right and left grand, because they're transferring that information from one to the other. All you're doing is clicking the hand. Okay, it's also why it's easier to learn swing through and left swing through. It's much easier to learn after the students have mastered Alamo wave swing through and Alamo wave left swing through, because it's a transfer, it's a positive transfer of something they already know. Instructors need to be aware, however, that the ability to transfer knowledge from one learning experience to another may sometimes produce a reverse or a negative effect. And this is particularly true in an activity such as square dancing, when there's many other things to learn. Many movements have the same basic traffic pattern and are very easily confused. And this is where negative transfer comes in. Negative transfer is why some of the dancers will confuse walk and dodge or the movement scoot back. You set it up differently and walk. Oh, good. That person's walking into the center. Everything there, touch a quarter, walk and dodge, touch a quarter, scoot back. Everything after the touch and quarter for the person looking in feels the same. So they transfer it to what they know. That's the hesitation. It's also why the boys constantly courtesy turn on square through, because they've learned right and left through, and they're getting a negative transfer of that action, which is in their mind, in the movement of square through. Another thing to be aware of is language and flow similarities. We touched on that with touch a quarter, scoot back, or touch a quarter, walk and dodge. So you need to break those flows, but also the language. For instance, spin chain through, spin chain the gears, spin chain and exchange the gears. In these cases, the name or the dance feel of the movement already learned may hinder learning the new movement. Okay, instructors can use the power of knowledge transfer to good advantage by building on previous learned moves. This is what you want to do. However, as shown above, the instructors must also be aware of the danger of negative transfer, and they've got to be ready to counter its effect for the students. And a good way to do that is, as we were saying, separate similar and familiar sounding movements from each other by at least 3 or 4 sessions. There's a lot of callers now that like to teach right and left through. Early they get it there, but they have problems with square through. There's a lot of callers now that don't teach right and left through until well after square through is done. They don't even do that. The only courtesy turn they do is on the ladies' chain, which may come earlier. This separation allows much more positive transfer, that building on what you know to help the dancers learn the new movement. So if you can be aware of the barriers to learning, you can take steps to prevent them. If you're not, then we get what's called the effect of these barriers. These are the errors that we do. And the errors take a long, long time or may never get fixed. In many applications, people learn from their mistakes. In square dancing, the opposite is almost always true, and that's teaching mistakes. This is because we dance by executing the movements more or less automatically, and the automatic reaction is achieved through repetition and the development of reactive reasoning in things like body flow or use of hands or timing. So if you're teaching, if this repetition, the flow, the timing, or the dancer expectation is flawed or wrong, then their automatic reaction is also going to be wrong, and repeatedly doing this builds a bad habit of wrongness. Because of this, the instructor or the teacher must be aware of the student's actions during the early phase of learning any new movement. It's also why you need to be aware of the definitions and not take shortcuts. The dancers must be given adequate error-free repetition, or what we call perfect practice. I don't mean you have to be perfect in every detail, but the perfect practice during that initial learning stage. Any movement which is practiced incorrectly results in inaccurate execution. And as I said earlier, the classic example of this is the movement recycle. It's taught and still taught by many. Girls turn back, wheel and deal. It works beautifully. It works successfully until you actually try to do a recycle. Oh, hang on, we've got 2 people in the waiting room. I'm getting waiting room moments, but I still don't have my view on Zoom.
Well, Mel, I've removed Ethan and Huel from the meeting and put them in the waiting room, and then they refused to answer. So,
okay,
I'm watching.
Yeah,
I'm back, guys.
okay. Yeah, just mute yourself unless you have a question there.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, because of this, the instructor's got to be aware of the student's actions during the early phase of learning any move. So watch them and see if they do something wrong. The dancers have to be given adequate error-free repetition. And that's what we talk about, that perfect practice again. We talked about recycle. It works beautifully, but only until you start changing things. So when you get out of that boy on the end, girls in the middle, and then you call a swing through, and call a recycle, or you set up a left-hand wave with the boys on the outside or a same-sex wave, suddenly it's all changed. And there's hesitation. We can't undo the effect.
Betsy, Betsy.
Okay, you want to remove him, Mark, please?
Betsy. Alright, guys, I'm sorry. I'm leaving.
Every now and then we get somebody. Undoing the effects of this incorrect execution, including teaching hints, prompts, and shortcuts, usually takes considerably more time than the initial teach. Teach it wrong once, you're going to be fixing it forever. Therefore, we go right back to the initial. Teaching it right the first time is the best example. To do this, we've got a lot of tools available to us in dancing, in square dancing in particular, that are very, very effective methods by which we can use to teach people how to square dance. Most of these have been used for many, many years with great success, and any caller desiring to learn or improve their teaching techniques can benefit from a study of these following methods. And the first one is big circle techniques. Okay. Many our movements in dancing can be taught in the early stage of a beginner class using just the big circle, not getting everybody in squares and having a couple people sitting out one. Get them into the big circle. When using this big circle method, all the dancers can join in without waiting for those other three couples. You know, the caller has the advantage of being able to stand in the middle of the circle and thus focus the attention of the students on him or herself. And the big circle can be set up in a lot of different ways. You've got a single circle, that big ring with alternating boys and girls all facing in. You can set up concentric circles, men in one, ladies in the other, the outside circle facing in, the inside circle facing out, and you can work that kind of technique. Finally, the circle can consist of facing couples, one facing clockwise, one facing counterclockwise. That's the Sicilian circle type technique. Okay. The facing circles can also be set up as concentric circles with a couple in the middle and a couple on the outside, each facing each other. That's also a Sicilian circle type technique. These three types of big circles can be used in a number of different ways. So, for instance, in your large, big single circle, you can do circle left, circle right, your arm turns, your partner swing, star through, California twirl, do-si-do, promenade, and a whole bunch of movements. In concentric circles, boys in one, girls in the other, you can set these up for mixers and still go through a lot of those movements. In facing couple circles, the concentric circle, one couple facing in, one couple facing out, or one facing clockwise, one facing counterclockwise, you can use that for almost all of your two couple movements. Actually, you can use that for all your two couple movements. And one way to set up the big circle is to have every other couple wheel around, or turn around and face the couple behind them. Get a couple's promenade and you say every second couple wheel around or turn around to face the couple behind you. Let them sort it out. They'll sort it out. And if everybody's facing another couple, great. Make a couple corrections and you're there. Now you can do all sorts of things. And if you have problems with dancers, you call a pass through. You move to the next two. And now you've got them dancing with new people. And contra lines and things like that, they're variations of the big circle, but they're just facing lines that can be set up as facing couples with boys in one, girls in another, or couples. And the most easy way to set up contra lines as well, have them running up and down the hall instead of across the hall. Okay. The second method is two couple teaching. Now, I said over half the move, I think it's about 87% of the movements through the Plus program can be taught using only two couples. These movements can be taught in either a big circle, as described, or mini squares, which are two couples, two couple dancing. One way to set up the two couple or mini square is simply have the dancers form two couple squares or get them into a Sicilian circle. Okay, with one couple with their backs to the caller, one couple facing the caller, or one clockwise, one counterclockwise. The big advantage of this method is that all the dancers are receiving simultaneous practice without the distraction of the non-active dancers. We're not looking at the heads and sides are watching. We're not looking at sides and heads are watching or standing in an unusual position. Okay? Many callers, including myself, like to use this method to start the first tip of a class or an evening session. This way, when dancers are still arriving, anytime a new couple comes in and there's not enough for a full square, they can join this circle at any time. All I have to do is pass through, move to the next, and they're suddenly in the flow. keep my sequences short, and everybody can dance all the time. When the dancers are familiar with the action of moving into mini squares, you want to have some fun, you get them up, call pass through and scatter promenade, and everybody find 2 couples. Once you get there, pass through, scatter promenade, find 2, get 4, make your squares, whatever you want to do. There's a lot of room to play with it. A third is demonstrations. Now, many times an effective demonstration is an excellent way to introduce new movements. And I strongly encourage it. This is particularly true during the early stage of new dancer learning, because the dancers are a bit hesitant. You're teaching them a new language, a new skill, reactive prompts, everything. Okay, using a demonstration couple to show the action of the movement will allow the student to learn in 2 ways. First, they hear the definition by learning and listening. And second, they will see the action. They learn it by observation. This helps reinforce the listening skills that they're going to need through the dance. Using a demonstration to show 1 or 2 couple moves is more effective than movements that require all 4 couples. So 2 couple movements are much more effective teaching by demonstration than all 4 couples. Remember this, showing movements like slide through, partner trade, touch a quarter, swing, right and left through, flutter wheel is much more effective with a demonstration than showing movements like spin chain through or relay the deucey. Okay? It's because the complexity of the movement that requires all 4 couples is very difficult for new dancers to follow. Doing it in 2 couples is not very limiting. And since most movements can be shown with 2 couples, it's a very, very effective teaching technique. Fourth is teaching by definition. The art of an effective caller teacher lies in the ability to describe in the very simplest terms the actions of the movements, not just read or parrot the definition. Anybody can get up there and read from the book and say, right, and with the adjacent hand, you're going to extend and cast off 270 degrees and blah, 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 blah. And the dancers, they shut you off. But to get up there and say, step forward, you take your hands, if it's right hand or left hand, whichever hand is adjacent, and cast off 3/4. Use something they know. Use that positive transfer. It's a lot more effective than just parroting words of a definition. This is especially crucial when a caller chooses to teach a movement without the benefit of a demonstration, these more complex moves. You've got to paint that picture in the mind's eye of the students, give them a vivid and graphic word picture of the movement action. Okay. The use of comparisons can be very effective, for instance, when we compare the action of right and left grand to, say, climbing a rope, right hand over right hand over left hand, or something that effect. For example, even though a caller may not actually teach wheel and deal from lines facing in, the students need to be taught in a way that this does not exclude that application. So, hey, from your lines, wheel and deal, the left-hand couple, take a step forward, and as couples, they turn towards the center. That will cover everything. If you're in a one-face line, if you're in a two-face line, the left-hand couple takes a step forward. If there's no left-hand couples, nobody takes a step forward. If they're both left-hand couples, they both take a step forward. You know, that happens on two-face lines. It works very effectively. Okay. The same principle must be applied to all moves taught. And in this, teaching by definition requires the caller describe each movement's action as precisely as possible. Except in the case of those very few gender-oriented moves like star through, box and add, slide through, or anything with a courtesy turn up to the plus program. The definition should include a description of the action in terms of ends and centers, insides and outsides, leaders and trailers, and boys and girls. So if you're doing a swing through, don't call it swing through boys trade all the time. Swing through, centers trade. Touch a quarter, centers trade. In the ocean wave, you've got boys on one end, girls on the other. Boys trade, girls trade, centers trade, ends trade. Mix and match so they get an idea of where they are in relation to the formation and where they are as an individual within that formation. As a minimum, every movement should be taught, should be shown, taught, and practiced from the most common starting formations and arrangement. And a list of those most common applications is contained in the standard applications book Okay, it's not just boy on the left, girl on the right. Standard applications can get quite complex. Depends on how they're used. Okay, but it's a very, very good guide. I'll try and find a copy. I'll send that to Mark to put up with the documents, but it is also available on the Color Lab website. The next one is the talk-through, walk-through technique. Okay. Students need to experience the flow of each movement taught, and many callers provide the dancers with a feel of the dance action of a new movement by using moves previously learned. Okay, this is maximizing the use of what we call positive transfer. This allows the students to experience the body flow, the hand usage, the facing direction, the distance, as well as feel the timing of the component parts of the movement well before hearing the name. And most callers use this. Classic example. How many of you as callers, if you're teaching recycle, I'm going to use that movement a fair bit, do a lot of ends cross fold before you do a teach of recycle, and you do it with the boys and the girls? How many of you use things like with the right hand trade, centers with the left hand trade before you teach swing through? How many of you do pass through and courtesy turn? Everybody give a right pull by, courtesy turn, long before you call right and left through. All these kinds of things are positive transfer, which allow you to teach that material much more effectively. Callers that use this method reduce the time it takes to introduce new movements. An added benefit, it also gives the dancers additional practice with the moves that they know, and you can also use those moves to show the action of the new move. The actual introduction of the new move almost begins with a talk through and then a walk through, in which the dancers are directed through the movement so that each can experience the physical nature of the dance action. There's many callers out there that after the basics, they very rarely stop to teach a movement unless it's a really complex movement. They walk them through the movements using this method with stuff they already know, and then they give it a name and they just carry on the dance. And in most cases, even on teaching tips, none of them are longer than a 6-minute tip. And then they can use that in a singing call. The actual introduction of new movements always begins with a talk through and walk through in which the dancers are directed through the action and they feel it. The first step is for the caller to dance the dancers to a starting position and then say, stop the music, turn it down, whatever you do. If the students are used to it, bang, you've created a sudden interruption that immediately turns their ears on and brings their attention to the caller. At this point, the caller will announce that they're about to learn a new move. They begin the walkthrough, they begin the talk through and the walkthrough process. And that's where the caller explains the action of the movement, then requires the dancers to physically follow the instructions. Okay. If I set you up in ocean waves and I call, okay, the dancers that are looking in are going to extend, turn through and come back. The dancers that are looking out are going to fold into the position where the in-facing dancer is. Right now it's on your right. Okay, ready? Go. In-facers turn through, out dancers fold, and back in an ocean wave. How many of you can tell me what that movement is? Practically everybody. We're talking scoot back, of course. But a talk through, walk through process, I've done a turn through, I've done a fold or a flip or a run. I've done those. Now I've done it, and then I can introduce scoot back. During this phase, the caller can, this method of teaching, the caller can introduce smooth dancing tips as well as the definition and the action. The caller must be especially watchful during the walk-through, talk-through process to make sure that the students are in fact getting through the actions absolutely error-free with smooth dancing. Okay? This error-free practice is critical in effective teaching, and it's the only way that the students are going to properly learn it. Now, the next one is probably the most important, and that's repetition and drills. You cannot teach something and then expect them to retain it unless you're going to use it, and you've got to give them a venue to use it in. Don't teach a movement in a pattern, successfully get them through it, and then do a singing call that doesn't use that movement. And that is a very, very common failing. Since square dancing is a motor skill, it can only be learned through direct personal experience, just like any other motor skill. It helps to watch other people perform the skill. It helps to hear the caller describe how it's performed. It helps to analyze the written definitions and pictures. but the only way to really learn how to perform the skill is to actually do it. And this experience usually starts with the walkthrough description that we just talked about. People learn to dance and develop an automatic reaction only through repetition. When they're familiar with the basic components, that's the body flow, the hand use, the turning direction, the distance, and all those other factors. When they're familiar with the basic components of that new move, it's time to provide them with the practical and practice that is error-free that they need to get that into their system. If your repetition is wrong, they will learn it incorrectly and their automatic reaction to the movement will be flawed. That means that you're going to be spending most of your time unteaching incorrect learning. And unteaching is a much longer process than teaching. And we see this. This is one of the most common complaints over the last years when new dancers go up to plus or they go to A1 or this massive rush. They get them through flows in simple terms without understanding what they're doing. And then the callers have to unteach in order to teach the next program. Some estimates put the time at about 4 times the original teaching time. So if it takes you a week to teach something, it's going to take you 4 weeks to unteach it and then another week to teach it properly. Meanwhile, you've just lost 5 weeks of dancing. This time is going to be increased even more if the dancers have become very familiar with the movements and have experienced overlearning. In other words, and I use recycle again as the example, girls, you turn back, wheel and deal, or reach around and pull her across like a lawnmower. Okay. 40 years we've been trying to unteach that and it's still not being done because it's so ingrained. Okay. Teach it right the first time, even if it feels like it's going to take a little bit longer than needed. I can guarantee you it's going to be time very well spent. The last one I don't spend a lot of time on, but it is an effective way to learn, and that's reading. Reading is usually more effective, however, if accompanied by photographs and diagrams of figures. The Learn to Square Dance little handout book that had the diagram of the dancer or the pictures of the dancers going through and then the diagrams of the movements with the explanation was an excellent, excellent teaching resource in that matter. There are some people, although not many, who can learn the skills required to square dance simply by studying written material and pictures. We've all heard stories of the people, oh, well, I didn't dance A2, but I read the manual on the way to the dance and we were able to get through it fine. There are some people like that. Some of you may be like that. I'm not. But those people are very few and far between. Even for those, though, that don't have the unique ability, it's a really, really good idea to provide them with written material, including definitions, styling tips, and timing information. Give them the material. Give them, if you're going to teach scoot back this week, give them the material that has scoot back in it, or give them the whole agenda with all of the movements and definitions. Say, you can flag it. This week we're looking at scoot back. They can go home and pre-read it, get a mind picture. All of these things will help. Even those unique people that can learn the definitions by reading will still require an amount of actual practice to acquire that automatic reaction needed when dancing. So all of those methods, if you can apply all of those methods, these will all cover those 4 teaching techniques and those 4 learning techniques that the students need. A good teacher is going to use all of these methods and interchange them. Some students can master a certain move with only a little bit of practice, and others need 20 to 30 repetitions before they can master that same movement. Because of that tremendous amount of material we're expecting new dancers to learn, this is what's been leading to the dropout of the students who don't learn as quickly as the rest of the group. And callers tend to focus on those that succeed because it makes their job easier for them. This doesn't mean those dancers that are taking so long cannot succeed. It just merely means that it's going to take them longer and they're going to require more practice to learn to dance. Unfortunately, it's a mistaken fallacy that we need to do it quickly. We need to move on and up rather than let the dancers enjoy dancing at whatever pace. And what this has meant is the decline of our activity. Losing 70% of the dancers was not a big issue when we get 100 new dancers come in the door and we get 30 that are going to stay. Oh, look at that. 4 times 8, 32. We got 4 squares of new dancers. Yippee-ki-yay, our club is growing. Yeah, but you've lost 70 dancers, or 68 dancers have left because it was not good for them. Okay. It's unfortunate, but statistics show that over the last 30 years, that dropout rate happens before they're provided with the practice they need to learn the dance and the ability to enjoy what they've learned. And those that have come were just lucky enough not to have shared that negative experience of the 70% that left the activity. And we as callers, we're calling for that 30% elite that's left. A solution to this situation, although rarely used, is to provide a second class for these students to attend. Teachers should be aware, however, that while some students will remember most of what was presented from the one session, there are those that will have forgotten, and at least some, if not most of the material, is out of their mind when they come to join the second class. It will refresh and learn a little quicker. But when we add the fact that at any particular session, there's going to be students that have missed the last session for any number of reasons. So the importance of that review and that dancing, that ability to walk through, talk through, show, demonstrate, and use is absolutely crucial. And the importance of review and dancing cannot be overemphasized. Just because a move was presented, practiced, and danced during a particular class session, and you did it fantastically last week, and you come back and you go to use it, there is absolutely zero guarantee that your class has retained that movement. Generally, it's a good idea to include during the first and second tip of a class session, a review of the recent movements, of the movements that you presented the last week, and then use everything that you've used up to that point. But your focus is, what did I use last week? Review it, use it. Okay. The entire class can also have a session where hardly anything can be learned, no matter what your best attempt is. We've all had these nights. And during those class sessions, the instructor should be prepared completely to throw the lesson plan out the window, abandon that lesson plan for a session that's simply just going to provide a review or fun night. Forget about teaching. It's not going to happen tonight. We're just going to have fun dancing and using what we know. What that does, that decreases the stress of not progressing for not only for the students, but for the instructor as well. And callers who are not able to adjust their planned session for these types of situations will most assuredly frustrate at least some of the students, and you're going to lose more. There is a big thing. So I have a program to follow, and it's an unusual constraint. I work for the club. The club executive has given me 12 weeks to teach the SSD program, and then we're starting another one the following Monday. That's it. I've got these constraints. Learn to say no. Okay. We need to change the learning curve so that we get out of that. You remember it? The curve went like this, 70%, 30%. This is a more realistic learning curve, and it's not just about square dancing. This is a learning curve that has been used in any kind of activity, learning a physical and a mental and an academic activity that's combined, such as square dancing, but it applies to baseball, it applies to football, it applies to bowling, it applies to all sorts of different things. Okay? We need to change our learning curve to one of inclusion rather than one of elitism, which is what we generally have now. The numbers that we have now are not sustainable. We all know that, but we still do the same thing we've done for the last 30 years, and that's lose most of our class potential. We've lost most of our class potential now before the even starts because of so many that we've lost that had a bad experience. No learning experience for any group progression, for any group progresses in an upward curve. Okay, it generally goes up and then it drops, and then it goes up and then it drops, and then it goes up. And you'll have some people that say, no, this is not for me. I've actually tried it. Yeah, I've learned some stuff. I enjoyed it, but it's not for me. But the vast majority that have had that progress and have had that fun experience are definitely going to say, wow, you know what? I really enjoyed that. And now I've been given the opportunity with these spurts and these dips to actually practice the material I've learned. And the caller is going to use a program and program into the program into his teaching schedule, review dance sessions to provide that opportunity to relax and have fun. So this is what you will get. You'll get your new dancers come in the floor. There's your first couple of nights. This is hard. And now you're going to teach something. Okay, I'm going to introduce a couple. Ooh, this is a bit difficult. Oh, yeah. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I get that. Now I'm going to use it. Now I'm going to introduce, teaching new stuff. I'm not sure. Okay, I'm going to stop here We're going to have a review and fun night because the dancers are saying, I don't know what the hell this guy is doing or what he's talking about. Now, at this point, this is where you'll get your 30 and your 70, but the 70 you're keeping, the 30 you're losing, and hopefully it won't even be that. The important thing to look at is look at where this curve is. Here's where you started. This is hard. They've gone up to here. It's down. I'm not teaching anything new, but I'm giving him time to learn it and reinforce it. And look at the speed of this curve. Because I've given him that time, that curve is upward quicker, faster, retained more, and now it's a slower progression. And you see this all the time. We do a fast progression in our first couple of nights, and then we slow it down. At this point, we're only learning 2 or 3 movements maximum per night. And the dancers are using it and applying it to what they already know. So for God's sake, let them dance, let them have fun. Program those review sessions into your system and provide the opportunity to relax and have fun using the material you've learned. Use those basic teaching techniques. Okay. Teaching new dancers is a very important, and it's very important, period. It requires certain skills which can be studied, developed, and practiced. Okay. It's not natural. There's no such thing as a natural teacher. You have to learn, practice, and study these skills. Callers have to learn how to teach people to dance. And for some, this is going to be easy. For others, it's going to be difficult. And remember, there's many different teaching styles, techniques, and methods. Some are going to be effective with some and not with others. You've got to learn to do them all. You've got to develop the ability to apply the appropriate technique to each situation, and in some cases, to each student. Even though the application of these techniques is application by experienced instructors cannot guarantee success, the combination of these elements and the experience that you have can help increase the probability of success. The question is, how do I get that experience needed to become an effective teacher? Well, there's no simple answer to that, and it's going to be different from each person or for each person. Effective methods to acquire experience include studying the information like what I'm presenting here, obtaining and studying additional information about how people learn, and developing a comprehensive understanding of not only what is being taught, but how I apply how people learn to what I want to teach them. A caller knows that his or her material is what is in my mind. Okay, I know my material, I understand it. But a caller that teaches also understands teaching styles and techniques and the methods of learning, and is going to have those tools to be flexible, to present and be accepted by a much broader range of learning styles. The only outcome that you can have in that is you become a more effective communicator when you're imparting your knowledge. And if those teachers train and learn how to master teaching techniques, they're going to be able to make the learning fun. They're going to take their time with the activity, and the students are going to enjoy it. They're going to build their own confidence, and ultimately it'll result in more dancers wanting to stay and dance, and more dancers, more importantly, wanting to share the activity that they enjoy. It's only a side bonus that teaching a class can make you a better caller. Okay, that's going to happen, but that should not be why you're doing it. Okay. Finally, one of the best ways to acquire these critical skills is to study and practice under the watchful eye of an experienced and a qualified coach or mentor. That doesn't mean you have to be an accredited caller coach, but if you have a caller that is an experienced caller and a good mentor and is able to impart that knowledge and positively reinforce your learning about how to teach, you have an excellent bonus benefit right from the start. And there's a couple of really good ones here. Betsy, Jeff, Mike Sikorsky. If you ever get the chance and they're available for advice or practice, they are phenomenal they're excellent at it. And they're available. Send them an email. Say, hey, I'm having a problem with this. What do you think? I'm sure they're more than willing to impart that knowledge or to give you that little hint that's going to make you just that little bit better. Right. Hey, I got my screen back. Look at that. Yeah, apparently we had a couple of bloggers that were in as callers talking about their calling experience. And Mark, thank you very much. I guess they got a little bit too disruptive and they have been booted. But let's open this up for comment and questions. Did we have any questions in the chat? I don't think so. It says I got one new message. Raymond said some dancers like using terminations to see the movement of the call. Yes, that's something else that is coming out an awful lot. There used to be the teaching handbooks with the advent of IT. Terminations is a good program. It shows the dancers the flow of the movements by definition. It doesn't show them the timing, but it can assist them in building that mind's eye mental picture of what they do. If you're going to recommend dancers use terminations, I would strongly suggest that you take your computer, you set it up, you put up a screen, and you spend time, even if it's a half hour, showing them how to use terminations and how to understand terminations. Don't just say, go to this website and learn it. Because they start typing, they'll put in a movement, they see the dancers moving, they go, what the heck was that? Show them what it means. Show them to look at it as you look at it. Okay, you're the number one man and we're going to look at square through. Click on number one man. Draw that path so they can see where square through goes. There's a whole bunch of things. Mike has also said, check out Saddlebrook Squares. Can you expand on that a bit, Mike?
Yes, it's a club here in Arizona in Southwest Tucson, Northwest Tucson, excuse me. And years ago, they filmed, and it's available on the web, and it takes you, I believe, all the way through Plus. The caller and his wife have now passed on. It was Larry Kraber. He did an excellent job of explaining the dancers they used. I know all of them. They're excellent dancers, and there are people who prefer to watch real people do the calls than terminations.
Yeah.
So it's best to offer the dancers both. And I find a lot of students have checked out both. And once they've watched the real people, the Saddlebrook Squares, termination starts to make more sense.
It does. I put the link to the video lessons. Saddlebrook's got the mainstream and the plus by movement up there. So hang on a sec. I'm going to see if I can actually do this. Okay.
Hey, Mel.
Yeah, we had a group of students. Some of them we gave them those video lessons to watch, and they learned what they were messing up really good that way.
Okay, I'm trying to look for original sound here, but I don't know. But this is an example that you find. Can you guys hear that?
No.
Original sound is here somewhere, but I don't know where it goes.
You have to check when you share down at the bottom. You have to check the option for audio to share the audio too.
Okay, so share screen. Hang on. The share sound is ticked. Okay, and we go.
There are a few calls that are not caller labbed.
Right. I was gonna say that because when I started calling in 2018, I wasn't going to be a caller, but I used these to teach my first class because I was brand new and I wasn't a caller. But we set up a TV and everything, and but there were a couple calls that I wouldn't use, like recycle, because they teach the old way on these videos, and so my students use these still. We use them, but we tell them, okay, that's a regional preference. That's not the way it's supposed to be. That's a regional preference to eliminate contention.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the other thing with terminations is what I started doing is I do a recap. So I type up a thing where it has all the moves we've learned, the positions, and then what we learned last week is separated from the rest. And then what we are going to learn is in that one on the top. And at the top, I remind them, if you're using terminations, it's basic 1, basic 2, mainstream, so that they don't get bogged down and they can remember what they're going there to look at.
Yeah.
Yeah, using the making sure that they're aware that they have both resources is a really good idea. It's just another example of sort of multimodal learning, just like the difference between the demonstration and the definition.
Yeah.
Some people can well, I don't know what the percentages are, but some people, if you show them terminations, they just totally don't get what they're looking at. They just
shut down.
They just can't understand this. Their brain's just not wired up to see that. Like Mike said, though, maybe after they've seen the live dancers in the picture doing it, then maybe the terminations will make sense to them. Maybe.
Absolutely, Chris. I'm gonna see if I can show this video, and then we've got Betsy with her hand up. But is the sound coming through?
Yeah, it is.
Now it is.
Okay. So these are video training lessons.
The name of this call is Couples Trade. This is done as a couple, and you simply trade with the other couple that you're in line with. Dancers couples trade. The name of this call is Couples Hinge.
Okay, and as you see, it goes through, there's little walkthroughs, and as Cece said, there are a number of videos out there that are like this. There's a lot of material out there watching people do this. You saw on that one on Couples Trade, the lady that was on the right-hand side of that two-face line looking in, started by backing up to give room. There's little adjustments. People are going to ask those types of questions. That's where you can explain things like square breathing and stuff like that. When I use references and reference material, I like to provide the material. I like to provide them what we've done so they can tick it off, highlight it, look at it. And then I don't like going too far ahead. This is what we're going to learn over the next 6 weeks. Okay. If you give them a whole bunch of material, square dancers are one of two people. They really don't care. You've given them the book. Thank you very much. It never gets touched again. Or it's been read 37 times before the next lesson comes, and you're going to be teaching star through next week, and they're asking, okay, on that spin chain through, I didn't understand what was happening. Okay. You've only got two types in there generally when you give them too much material. But as Mike said, it is an excellent resource. Terminations is also an excellent resource, but it does not replace teaching. So use it wisely, but show them how to use the material. Show them what it does. Betsy, you had your hand up.
Yes, I was going to say we had made teaching videos, and one of the things we did on these teaching videos, they were done in a TV studio. So we had a camera that was hung from the ceiling. The reaction I got was either I love the overhead shots or I hate the overhead shots. And the people who hate the overhead shots will never understand terminations because it doesn't suit their learning style.
Yeah. There is generally a one extreme or the other that goes in there. I got Chris, you've got your hand up, and then Roz.
I was just going to make a comment just on that one clip you showed of the couples trade there, talking about the words that you use when you're explaining things to people. Now, in this case, it's coupled with a physical demonstration, so it's not as bad. But what the guy said was the couples trade is simply the couples trade, which is maybe not the most, you might want to say something a little different, like it's this whole couple trading with the other whole couple. It reminds me a lot of the teach that when I was learning mainstream, my first caller, who I love, by the way, I think he's a great caller, but but his teach for the call run, which had no demo, consisted of him saying the following words. He said, "Okay, I'm going to show you the call run. All right, boys, run around the girl."
Yeah.
That was the whole teach.
Absolutely.
So couples trade
this
is
is one
simply
of
couples trade is not maybe the best
One of the things you have to take into account, Chris.
Also think about the other materials that you're going to be presenting that are not your own. You might want to look at them first to have some idea what it's going to exactly say.
Yeah, one of the things that you have to take into account, and you're absolutely correct, these video sessions, like that's starting up at the mainstream level. These sessions are, that's just one I picked at random, but the sessions that were done on these videos, and the same with the ones that Betsy did, because I reviewed yours, and that was quite a while ago. Betsy, you got to get back in the studio. Is they take,
can't afford it.
They take the maximum advantage of what we call positive transfer. So in this case, couples trade, if you look at that video in isolation and you use that as a teaching guide, Chris, you are absolutely 100%. It doesn't explain what we're doing. But at that point, they have done couples. You're going to move as couples, do a circulate. We have done trade. Okay, boys are in the middle. The boys are going to trade places with each other. Girls are in the middle. Girls, you're going to trade places with each other and keep your hand joined. We've done partner trade. They've done that, and they're building on that positive transfer. So in this case, couples trade is familiar to them. The couples aspect, the couples working, couples circulate is already familiar with them. Couples trade, that's built on the positive transfer of knowledge that's already gained. But like any teaching resource, and this is where Taminations actually does fall down, like any teaching resource, looking at material in isolation with a program from an overhead view, or looking at a program in isolation, if you take one aspect of it and that's what you use as the foundation, you are going to get lost. There's nothing wrong with the video itself, but it has the assumption that you've already got that basis of terminology. And if you want to apply that, think of it like driving a car. If I say to you, okay, so at this point, what you're going to do is you're going to depress the clutch and then change into third. I'm making the assumption you already know what a clutch is. I'm making the assumption you already know the car. I'm making the assumption you're already moving forward down the road and you know how the gears are laid out on your transmission. But I wouldn't say, okay, take your left leg, extend it, depress down until you feel the disengagement of the transmission. Because you will have, I'm using the positive transfer that I assume you already have that information to get to that point. But think of a new driver and I sit you into a car and you've never driven before. And I say, okay, so just go down the road and then shift in third when you get to the stoplight because it's still green. Go really fast. So it's just turned yellow, go really fast. Whatever. Okay. Those are the kinds of things that you really have to take. I got Roz, you had your hand up, and then Chris has got your hand up.
Yes, Traveling Hoedown has put out a CD that you can actually get, and we ordered some, must be about 5 years ago, and we took a copy, so we'd have the original, and the copy we actually rent out to our dancers. We charge them $10. When they give us the copy back, they get their $10 back, and then they use that, and we've had some good success with that. One dancer, she'd had a stroke and was told she'd never walk again. And she square danced, she graduated, and she'd look at it every day. And before she came to the dance, she'd look at it to refresh. So, and we just say, put it on the TV, use the pause button so you can slow it down. And that was really good.
Where I have an expression that drives my wife absolutely crazy. I say, where there's a will, there's a Wilkerson. But the reality of that expression is, if you really want to do something, you will find a way to do it. And there is a lot of material. Mike gave us an excellent link to some teaching material. Taminations is another link. Betsy's got her video. Are those still available, Betsy?
I still have a bunch on CD, yes.
Okay. Yeah, but nobody's got a CD player anymore.
Well, that's life. Taminations basically put us out of business. Roy has the figures. The year before Taminations came out, we sold a humongous number. And the year Taminations came out, we sold many less. And then after that, it was, if anybody wants them.
Yeah, and this there is a lot of really, really great material that is still out there. If you do have a CD reader, and you can pick those up, they're like what, $30 now, cheap as. If you can get the material, get it. It's all really, really good material. And anything you can do to augment and enhance the dancer's experience, the dancer's understanding, and the dancer's enjoyment of this activity is a positive. But the big thing is, take your time. I've got Chris with your hand up, but there's one comment that was made in here I want to address first, Chris. Steve has said his mic's gone out, but he's in the position that many callers are in. It's a very unenviable position of you're subject to the whims of the people that employ you as their caller. And he was 3/4 the way through his first class, and the club vice president decides, oh, he's got 5 friends come in, they want to start over. So 3/4 of the way through class, they want him to start over, but they still want him to be finished all the teaching within 22 weeks. It's just not going to happen. Okay, so you've got to be prepared to say no. Don't put false constraints and false expectations, because if you give your dancers false expectations, that's what they're going to hold you to. If you give your club false expectations, that's what they're going to hold you to. SSD, great program. Don't set it at 12 weeks and start another one. But if you want to do 2 a year, it's an excellent program for that. Sometimes even 3 if you've got the venues. Okay, I got Chris, and then I got Mike Sikorsky. Chris.
I wanted to sort of make a comment about judgment when you're the teacher. You're going to be using your judgment in a lot of ways all the time, of course. But I was thinking about taminations and the other kinds of materials. And one thing you want to be careful of, particularly with new dancers at the beginning, is to sort of not overwhelm them with too much stuff. How you dole out the information about the calls and how much you work the calls from different positions and whatever, depending on the way of what you think you're building towards in your program. You got to be a little bit judicious about not throwing too much stuff at them. We want them to have all the resources, but for example, it might be a judgment call about whether you show them taminations on like the first night or something like that. Just to use taminations requires them to have a bunch of vocabulary. It's going to be showing them what there's definitions and there's left-hand waves and right-hand columns and what the hell are those, right? They don't know yet. So so when you present these things, sort of make sure that they're ready for that.
Absolutely.
As far as taminations goes in general, it's a fantastic thing.
Yeah, Taminations is a program, and I know it was designed for mainly the dancers to have a look at that, and then it's expanded and expanded and expanded and expanded to now it's almost the be-all end-all for teaching, and some people write their choreography using that. I'll take you back a step, and what Chris is saying is absolutely true. Caller judgment is something that should be on every curriculum, and it shouldn't be you've got to use judgment to make sure you don't overwhelm the dancers. End of that session, let's move on to the next one. It's something that has to have time and energy put into it when learning how to call and learning to teach callers how to call. I know both Mike and Betsy do this. I do this myself. When you're teaching a new class, your first class is not about learning the definitions. Your first class is not about this is called this. It's not about the language. That's given lip service, a brief introduction, but it's about getting on the floor, moving, having fun, enjoying it, enjoying that social aspect, having a good laugh, and enjoying the company of other people, and feeling that I come away from something with that feeling of success that I enjoyed this. I want to come back and learn a little bit more about that. And it's not until well into I can move around the floor, I can move around the square. I think you still do it this way, Betsy, that material is actually presented, because then you've got, you don't gut the fish before you catch it. Can I put it that way? You've got to catch that fish. You've got to put the bait out there. You've got to get them on the hook, bring them into the boat before you club them over the head and gut them. Well, it's the same with square dancers. Maybe not the best analogy, but you've got to bait the hook. You've got to get them into the boat before you can teach them how to dance.
Well, here's another terrible analogy, but it's true. Drug dealers give out a sample, and then when the people are hooked, then it costs money. In a way, we're pushers. We're pushers of something more healthy, but we give them samples. We do the beginner things. We do, open houses, and we just make it fun. We don't worry about vocabulary. And then when they've had fun, then we kind of set the hook.
Here's a call called a do-si-do. The first one is free.
Mike, you had your hand up there for a second.
You brought up a situation a caller faced that the vice president brought in 5 students.
Yeah.
And okay, so that very same thing happened to me this season. It's a little different here in that this is weird, but this winter, I started my first class October 28th. That's very early around here, winter seasons wise. And I had 2 others. So I actually have 3 beginners class sessions going. And most of the dancers are going to 2 and 3 of those. So literally we're polishing up mainstream at this point, and they're 10 calls into plus already.
Yeah.
The club I'm teaching for on Friday nights is a year-round club, not seasonal. They want to go plus. And the dancers all want to do that. Now, in the middle of that, about 5 weeks ago, the person who got us the hall and lives at that resort was able to get the hall for us, brought in 2 couples, and they'd never square danced before. And I can tell you, it's a little challenging trying to teach somebody circle left on the same night you're trying to teach load the boat.
Yep.
But she says, please try and include them. So that's where in my case, I love my wireless mic. Because you walk out on the floor and say, we're going to do this. You delve right into the material. And in that case, you have to say, you're going around the outside. When you pass that person again, you face in. And whoever's coming around at them, they know the call because I'm reviewing it, you see.
Yeah.
Now,
within that scope, Mike, you also put in a lot of off to the side introduction, a little additional time with the new people to bring them up to what you're going to do.
They stepped right out on the floor. I did not.
Okay.
They just came in and I was notified about 4 minutes before the class started. So there was no way to do that.
Okay.
I said, put them on the floor. We'll see what we can do. One of the couples never came back. The other couple is still there. And sometimes the sale have to say, you turn around and go that way, but they're coming to 2 and 3 classes a week and they're going to make it.
Yeah.
So I'm speaking for definitely about reinforcing what you said about learn people's learning styles, learn the people, what's their tolerance.
Absolutely.
If they're going to be embarrassed, they're not going to make it.
That's right. And for a lot of people, unless they're really dedicated, and you have an advantage in these are friends that are coming in, and Stephen has the same thing. These are friends that are coming in, they're bringing them into the activity. But when you think about that, Mike, you had a 50% retention rate, it's 2 couples. That's a really, really good retention rate, but it's also a 50% loss rate, but it's the activity and it's the ambiance that keeps that other couple there while they're learning.
If they feel that you're investing in them and their friends feel you're investing in them, that makes a lot of difference.
Yeah.
Now, the last thing I want to say that I want to add in here is I put a lot of emphasis when I teach teaching on the first 6 weeks, and the principles I teach, I feel are violated by almost every caller in the business. One is square through, and I'm talking about the first 6 weeks. I teach square through second night. It's only for a squared set, and they will not get it in any other formation or way until week 7, or maybe 8. I do not teach right and left through from squared set. That is brain damage because you put the 2 together and they're turning the wrong way on square through on the second hand.
Yeah,
so
that reinforces what I was saying with the positive and negative transfer. Absolutely.
Right, and I'm going to get to that part because I'm still in week 2 now when I teach head square through 4 and they learn star through. Now they know what a line is, so now I can teach them pass through, bend the line. This is all week 2 and week 3.
Mm-hmm.
From that corner line, head square through 4 and star through. That's the footprint I remember. I pass through, we're going to learn trade. And the initial teach on trade is girls trade, and it's a step forward pass. And face back in, because that's critical in the first teach a trade. You could tell them one common thing, face back in. Boys trade, pass through, repeat it, they're back to a corner line. You do that a few times, and now you can teach centers trade and ends trade. Now, when you've done centers trade, they've done a half sachet partner trade and they don't know it. Just drop hands, face each other, pass, and walk back and face back in. And I find that it's very easy down the road. And before I go down the road, let's go to week 4 and week 5, because now that we've done regular partner trade, now I'll go back to the corner line pass through girls trade. They've been in an ocean wave all along and they don't know it yet.
Yeah.
So I said, now we're going to learn a different kind of trade. Those touching right hands, trade, walk forward around that right hand and change places. And I don't have any problem with somebody trying to face back in. Then I have the centers trade with their left hand. Then we trade with the right hand and we trade with the left hand.
Yeah.
Then you can have either the boys trade or girls trade to get back, which is the take a peek kind, and get back to something you can module out of. But when I do it that way, I had a caller who's been calling almost as long as me. He's a local caller from Midwest, comes down here for the winter, and he told me, he said, I wish I'd known this 40 years ago, because nobody overturns on the swing through. And I think the worst thing you can do, is my last comment, is teach Alamo first, because you are, first of all, you're saying all hands work, everybody does all parts. Now you put them in a wave and you wonder why they want to overturn or they want to take another hand. I teach Alamo ring about 15 weeks after I've taught swing through the way I just described it, and nobody overturns. Nobody has a problem, and they've learned to trade appropriately. So now I have no problems with swing throughs. Spin the top is not really an issue. When I get to load the boat, it's not really an issue. When they learn trade that way, all of their calls get easier.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
My retention rate around here anyway, and I go by about the 4th class, because people try it the first week or two and decide, nah, this ain't for me, and they quit. So what you've got at about week 4, that's your gauge. And I'm averaging between 90 and 110% at the end of the class.
Yeah. That was one thing that there was a comment that came in about retention rates. And where do I judge that? And I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm a firm believer your first 3 nights don't count, because I've always said that when I'm getting people. One of the things, and it's said as a joke, okay, you bring him to the first 3, and my job is to guarantee that he'll bring you to the rest, which means week 4 is where you judge the retention rate. And that's just so that you've got an option. Yeah, I tried it, not for me. Okay. But week 4, and then week 12, and then week 30, depending on what program you do, that's where you judge your retention. And if you've got the same amount at week 12 that you had at week 4, you're doing it right. If you've got the same amount at week 30 that you had at week 12, you're lucky, because you will have lost 1 or 2 always. You're always going to lose 1 or 2 because life gets in the way of square dancing. But that is a good retention rate. But if you're sitting there at week 4 and you get to week 12 and you've lost 30%, it's time to look at what you're doing. And if you get from week 12 to week 30 and you've lost more than 50%, you really need to look at what you're doing. And it doesn't matter if you've got 2 couples or if you've got 20 couples or if you've got 40 couples that come in the door. That's really what you have to look at. Don't look at 1 couple dropped out, because life gets in the way. A couple of things that were also noted, and one of the reasons I'm so glad both Mike and Betsy are here. Mike and Betsy both have 2 completely different teaching schedules, if you will, or teaching organizational charts of how they structure their performance, their classes, and how they teach. Both of their structures, okay, I have a different one. I want to tell you right now that all of them are correct. Okay, do not lock yourself into my way is the way. The Collar Lab way is the only way this has to be done. This has to be done the way Mike Sikorsky taught me. Betsy put these videos out, and it has to be done in this order. Every caller is going to find a way that works for them. And if it works for you and it works for your dancers, that is the correct way. Okay. And you've got to trust that. They also have a second advantage, even if they work for, and I'm not sure, are all you're employed by the club, are you, Mike?
No, we have contracts with the resort. That is a wrinkle I should have mentioned. I have a contract to teach for the resort, but I don't work for a club except on my Friday night.
You have complete control of the program though, don't you?
Of two of the classes I do. The third one is for a club, so technically I don't, but it's such a small club. The president has basically given me carte blanche, and she likes my idea. Like last season, for instance, I said about week 7, let's have them stay for the first club tip, and I'll just call it at their level. So I begin to blend people into the club right away, because the class is 5:30 to 7, the dance is 7 to 9. And I saw people wearing club badges before they graduated SSD. And that's all I had time for, but I had 3 people show up at the national convention in Evansville, Indiana, out of that class in Arizona.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to really stress about that is if you are hired by a club or hired by a group or hired by a resort or something like that, as the caller, make sure part of that contract is you have control of the program. Okay. And the reason I bring this up, one of the issues that Steve was facing, because it wasn't the fact that 5 new people came in that drew my attention in his query. It was the fact that 3/4 of the way through a 22-week program. Okay, so we're 15, 16 weeks into a program here. 5 new people show up. The vice president, who's in control of the program, says, right, we're going to start again at 0. Here's circle left, but I still want you to be finished in 22 weeks at the 22-week mark. It cannot be done. Sorry, it can be done. It cannot be done the way those impositions and those constraints are being put on. What Mike described, yes, it can easily be done the way Mike's doing it. You've got exceptional dancers, and some would come and some would leave. But if you are constrained completely by the club, your hands are tied in a lot of ways that they don't need to be tied. But you can also think and use that to your advantage, because if the club says you have to do this, you have to do this, oh, this is a plus group, great, get up and call a plus dance. Even if you've got all mainstream dancers, you say, I've got this. You call that first tip and say, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but I've been told I can only call a plus dance, so here we go. And I guarantee one of 2 things will happen. They're going to let you have the program and let the dancers enjoy and come to the dances, or they're going to fire you. Neither one of those is a bad thing. Okay, you don't want to work for somebody that's going to do that, and you want to make sure if you do get control, you're giving the dancers a good time. They're going to come to your dances. They may not dance at that club, but they're going to come to all your dances elsewhere. Betsy, you had your hand up, and then Brian, you've got your hand up.
I think Brian was first.
Okay, Brian.
So yes, indeed, a lot of the teaching decisions and calling decisions are all 100% your fault and the reason why dancers are leaving. However, there are many things that are sort of outside your control that have dancers leaving your group, like other dancers walking up to your new dancers and telling them, hey, you should go buy yourself some square dance clothes and look like the rest of us, and things that are not, they're kind of happening in the club without your knowledge. You don't actually know what's happening, and then all of a sudden people aren't coming back because they're being pressured into things, whether it's dressing up in square dance clothes, which isn't necessarily necessary for the club, or they're being told, oh yeah, well, you should volunteer to bring goodies next week, or do this or do that, or we need some people on the executive, could you please volunteer next year? And so all of these sort of weird things that happen outside of just caller teaching are also contributing to the numbers dropping, because I know a lot of the dancers who have been doing it for years, and who have volunteered for years, are sick and tired of doing that, and they would love all the new people to do it. Well, unfortunately, when you put that much pressure on all the new people, they tend to say, you know what, I don't need this. I'll go bowling. It's a whole lot easier.
Yeah, which is actually more expensive than square dancing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an excellent comment, Brian. And as I said, there are thousands of reasons why dancers leave dancing. The number one reason, they're not enjoying it. It's too much, it's too fast. And that's still the number one reason. Number two, life gets in the way. You got kids, oh, my kid, I got to go support my kids at basketball, and that's on the same night as a square dance night. Life gets in the way. Well, guess what? If they manage to come for the first few and you gave them a good experience and life gets in the way, when the kids are able to go to basketball on their own and you're still there, you created a memory. That doesn't mean they're lost. It just means there's a hiatus. But what Brian is saying is also a big detriment. When dancers come in and suddenly they feel like women have to wear lampshades and men have to wear frou-frous, or you're not allowed, you're not welcome here, guess what? You've lost a bunch of people. I've seen callers and caller presentations 30 years ago where the strongest aspect that was being presented by the caller teacher was, if you're going to get up on stage, you need to be able to stand up there. And if you're wearing a suit with the rhinestones, or you're wearing, it doesn't matter if you're wearing a vest or a tie, but you should be appropriately dressed. And that's a collared long sleeve shirt, pair of dress slacks. You don't have to be this, but maybe a bolo tie. You want to present yourself as a square dance caller. It's not informal, but it's not casual either. That was 30 years ago. Those same callers, and they are international world-renowned callers, if they're doing a big festival dance and something like that, that's when they're dressed like that. But now when they go and they do their club dance or a presentation or a fun dance, some of them you're going to see in a short sleeve polo shirt. I've seen them calling with a t-shirt and a ball cap on. I've seen, they're there to enjoy as much as the dancers are. And if they're enjoying it, and they're taking that constraint away from the dancers. Brian, you said there are still clubs that say you have to be in square dance clothes. Absolutely. There are clubs like that. I've called for one of those. But
there are even clubs that insist that you come as a couple.
I'm going to put this out on the floor, and you can take it for what it's worth. If something happens in your club, whether you're the club caller hired or it's your club that you don't know about, you're at fault. And the reason you're at fault is because you did not make it very clear and very welcoming that any issues that you're having on the floor, that they can come and talk to you and ask you about it. If there is harassment, if there is thing, and it is harassment. Oh, you got to get this thing and you can dress like the rest of us. That's harassment. As far as, it's not intended. But like I said, I'd rather have 20 dancers on the floor in a pair of blue jeans and a t-shirt than I would have 8 dancers in lampshades and frou-frous, as long as they're enjoying themselves.
Although it is easier to sight call on them when they're wearing the same color outfits.
Yeah, granted. When you look at that, though,
then they can just wear the same colored t-shirts.
Square dancing is like any other activity. If you go to your club and you do it casually, you don't always get dressed up for it. You go in and you enjoy it. But if you go to an event, you go to the bowling club annual dinner, you wear your club colors. You go to the big dinner, you get dressed up for it. Well, square dancing is no different than any other event. And you've got to be the person that sets that example. And if you're not the person that sets that example, then that's your fault. There are, and sometimes it takes a big ask. I think you've all heard my anecdote. I was asked to call for a club in Ontario, and I showed up and a couple came in. This lady was wearing a pantsuit. They were matching outfit, but she had pants on because she had leg surgery and she had a massive scar down her leg. She's coming in to dance, but she didn't like the look of it in a skirt. I had no problem with that, but they were turning her away at the door because she was not in proper square dance clothing. And I asked what their square dance clothing was. A shirt, the men would have a bolo tie or a scarf, a towel, proper square dance clothing. And I overheard this. I think I was out getting a coffee or having a cigarette at the time. And I came back in and I started packing up my equipment. And I was the feature caller. I was the only caller. And I said, and I apologize, I'm sorry, but I'm unfortunately not able to dance or to call this dance for you because I wasn't aware that the strictness of the rules of appropriate square dance clothing. I had a shirt, it was a dress shirt, but it didn't have a collar. It was buttoned. It had a diamond pattern that matched the vest that I was wearing. I had my badge on, everything else, dress pants, but I'm inappropriately dressed for your dance. And because the restricted things are turning people away, it would be inappropriate for me to call your dance because of this restriction. I didn't get the equipment packed up fully. I started packing it up. They changed and they allowed these people to come in. But I was willing to do that. I didn't care about my reputation. What they were doing was wrong. And you as a caller sometimes have to accept the fact that what could have happened. I was never hired to call at that club again, but I was hired to call at a lot of other dancers, and I had a lot more dancers coming to my dances because they knew they could come and they could dance and they could enjoy it. I did that dance, but that was it. Sometimes you got to take that bullet. Yes, Betsy.
Getting back to what I was going to say previously, although I have a comment on that dress code too. First, we didn't really mention too much that we owe the dancers practice for every call that they have been exposed to every single week, if we can do it. Now, as you get towards the end of a program, sometimes you don't, but we as callers owe the dancers the practice of calling every single call they've been introduced to every single week. And the checkoff sheets that they have, in the call with the Caller Lab programs should be used. We should mark down what we call, and then we know if we miss something.
I keep a whole little spreadsheet when I'm teaching, right up where the computer, or nowadays it's on the computer, but I keep a whole spreadsheet with every week. It's got all the calls, and it's got each lesson, and for every call I make a notation there about whether or not I remembered to review it, or whether it was introduced, or exactly what happened with the call, so that I can glance down at that, and I have a checklist that way of knowing which calls I need to remember to review or whatever. And I can also see ones that, oh gee, we haven't really done that one in 2 weeks. Maybe I better spend a couple of minutes on that again. So
absolutely,
keeping those kind of notes is very handy. A lot of clubs that I call for, a lot of them will also, if it's a class, they'll be keeping a spreadsheet too, because they want to keep track of you to make sure you're teaching all the calls. But I keep my own spreadsheet because it's got more detail.
I'm not sure if it was Cece or Janet that was saying something, but at their classes, they have a whiteboard, and it's like a tick box list. They put all the movements that they've done, or a tick. They have it all printed out, and they have a tick of the list, and it goes up at the front. This is next week. This is next week for the dancers. But Betsy, you made a comment there, and this is another one of these double-edged sword comments. And I agree with you, but it's an aspirational goal as opposed to a practical, realistic goal. And to call every movement that you've called that is on the program every week, I can tell you right now is possible, but it's untenable to maintain.
I fail. I fail on a regular basis.
Yeah, and
I try.
The reason is, I mentioned the standard applications document. We as callers, depending on what group we're calling for, look at a niche for our dancers, and some of them like head square through 4, right and left through, veer left, Ferris wheel, centers pass through, swing your corner, and promenade. That's their singing call. That's as far as they're going to go. They don't want anything more than that. Timing be damned. They get home, and if they stand there swinging their partner or having a conversation or a cup of tea because they got a tea table behind them until the next sequence starts, that's what they want. That's what you give them. In other cases, we were talking about this earlier, Yolanda, if you have a figure like head square through, sides half sachet, swing through. Now I've got a boy, girl, girl combination on the ocean wave, just a little bit different. Boys run, there's my lines, right and left through, pass through, wheel and deal, center square through 3, swing your corner, promenade. There's my exacting 64 beats that I'm going to go in with that. But, oh, wait a minute, what's that boy, girl, girl, ocean wave type thing? I may not have done that in a while, so I'll have to do that in my pattern. That's not changing swing through. It's still a swing through. It's still a standard formation swing through, according to your standard formations. What you have to look at Now my hand's up. What you have to look at is if you're going to use creative choreography, not just different choreography and not just variant choreography, but creative choreography, and you're going to use it as a regular basis, you've got to make sure that that regular basis of choreography is part of the repertoire. And going back to what Brian was saying, this is where a lot of caller judgment comes in. What are you going to do when you get a guest? What are you going to do when you go somewhere else? You have to be prepared to call at, they only want the bare minimum. They want a standard good dance with a little bit of variety and interest. They want, my God, upside down, inside out, upside down, twisted sideways and backwards with 17 phantoms in an 8-dancer square. That's what you ought to be prepared to call if that's what they want. But you cannot deliver one program to everybody, the same as you can't deliver every program every night. It's an aspirational goal. Make sure you deliver all of the movements on a relatively routine, regular basis throughout the program, and you're going to have much better dancers that are going to thank you for it, especially when they go somewhere else to dance. I've got my hand up. I have no idea why, so I'm going to lower that. And then I think, Brian, you had your hand up.
So one of the fun things that happened to me when it comes to calling all the calls on the list, I guess I was filling in for Ann Ubelacker at a convention in Sweden. It was called the Ericsson Festival, and that festival went from basic 53 all the way through C2. And I thought that the hardest thing I was going